maybe what you can do is just read for yourself with this video playing along, and take pauses to journal about your pulls, and then I think eventually you're gonna find your own spin on the Celtic Cross. Hi, I'm Chingai Labrador from practicalmagic.co, and I'm here to talk to you about how I do the Celtic Cross. The Celtic Cross is one of your very typical staple types of tarot readings. I think once you graduate from daily draws, from 3-card spreads, it's one of the main types of spreads that everybody learns to read. If you look at your tarot decks and they come with guidebooks, usually they recommend the Celtic Cross as a way to use 10 cards, all 10 cards in just one reading. And over the years, I've been doing this for myself a lot whenever I turn to the cards and want to do a reading for myself. If I have no questions, maybe I have like a vague intention, my go-to is really the Celtic Cross. Maybe it's because it's what I've learned over the years, and I think I've developed my own way of doing the Celtic Cross. I think it can be an intimidating spread to learn because 10 cards is a lot, and it's one thing to memorize all 78 cards of the tarot. It's another thing to up that knowledge with figuring out the 10 prompts that go with the Celtic Cross. And because like every deck, every tarot teacher has maybe their own take on the Celtic Cross, it can also be super confusing. So what I've stuck with, I think, is what makes sense to me. The kinds of prompts that I find useful, that I find never fail. So I'm gonna share with you the way I do the Celtic Cross in what I would think is a practical and magical way for you to work with any deck. I'm gonna be using the Rider-Waite Smith for my sample reading, and you can pull your own cards along with me as I discuss. First of all, to do a tarot reading, you need a tarot deck, and for the Celtic Cross, as many cards as it may contain, you really just need one tarot deck to do it. Personally, I like to mix my tarot decks with various oracle decks. Sometimes I use one, sometimes I use two. For the purposes of this video, I will start first with a tarot deck and make it very simple for you. So for this one, this is the classic Rider-Waite Smith deck. Most of the tarot decks I've made are based on this, and it's really known as the classic, so that's why I'm using it for this one. I like to shuffle my decks before I start reading, and while I like to riffle shuffle, I think just flipping the cards around has been my go-to as of late because I like to be very careful and ginger with my cards. So I just do it that way. I don't spread the cards around. I just kind of pick and choose as I please. So you can see here I'm assembling the bones of the tarot deck. You start with 2 cards that are overlapping. This is just the way I was taught, and it's the way I do it. I like to shuffle between pulls, so I'm gonna do that off screen, and then I pull one for the card that's below the 2 that overlap, and then another one on top of the 2 that overlap. So you see like the vertical line of the Celtic Cross coming along here. Then I shuffle again and pull one for the left side and one for the right side. So here we have like the actual cross beginning to form, and this is, I guess, the main structure of the reading. And then we move off to the side and we have a vertical line consisting of 4 different cards. So they're just stacked one on top of the other. And Celtic crosses, because they involve so many cards, they tend to take up a lot of space, and this is where the mini decks come in handy because then they're just easier. Like I'm on the floor here and it doesn't even fit in my camera. Unfortunately, the video I took of me flipping cards one by one didn't actually record. So anyway, I have this visual for you, which I think will probably work out better and will allow you to follow things through and through. So here we have laid out the structure of the Celtic Cross, and this would be my interpretation of it. So this is the main skeleton of the reading. What I like to do is pull two oracle cards. One that goes before this actual Celtic cross and one that comes after. And the reason for this is the first oracle card usually to me defines like the vibe we have while we're going into this reading, and then the last card kind of summarizes everything. I always like to end readings with an oracle card because they just feel like a good punctuation to the entire reading. So you can do that too. If you're pulling cards alongside me, you can pull your oracle cards as well. Two cards face down, one for the prologue of the reading to set the tone, and one for the end of the reading to wrap things up. The first card for the Celtic Cross, the way I do things, is the one that stands for you. What's going on with you now, what you're feeling, what's in your head, situation, experiences, any issues. Basically, this is standing in for who you are at the moment. You can also think of it as the present card. And I think this is always a very impactful card. Like the first card you flip over just really brings you into the world of tarot. It's almost like the doors opening for you and you're stepping into this world of self-reflection, immersion, and introspection. There are a lot of ways to read this next card, and I like to view it as tension. So if you consider your first card, which is yourself or your present self, this card comes in as the conflict that you're going through. So the card itself may not represent conflict, but you can interpret it as some kind of tug of war going on between this card and the first card. So it all depends. Sometimes the card that comes up here is in itself already tension filled. Let's say the devil or death or the five of wands. When it's that type of card, it's kind of easy to juxtapose it against the first card and see some kind of conflict happening. But when it's a more pleasant card like the star or the world or the ten of pentacles, it might take a little bit more of like a mental gymnastics to figure out how it's actually showing up as something that's bringing tension into your life or coming into conflict with yourself. So you can think of the opposite of what that card means. You can think of any kind of weird feelings it brings up with you. The card in and of itself is neutral, but if a feeling comes up that's kind of stressful or tension filled, that's something you might want to pay attention to as well. I like to think of this card as the underbelly of the situation of yourself. So it represents to me what you're not showing, what's not rising to the surface. Emotions, feelings that you like to stay hidden for one reason or another. And I think it's this card that I like to really sit with because a lot of times because these emotions are not brought out to the surface, it can take a little bit of time to dig and to really examine what it is that's going on underneath. So I like to spend some time reflecting on this because sometimes you're taking yourself and your situation on a very surface level type of reflection, and you really need to stretch your creative muscles and your juices and your heart to figure out what's at the root of everything. Going the opposite route of the previous card, this card represents what we are conscious of. So what we realistically and practically know, the things about our lives and ourselves that our ego can easily process. And I think this card kind of reflects also what we project out into the world. There's going to be a card that delves more into that, but I think what we know and what we're cognizant of has an impact on the way we present ourselves into the world. So maybe that's just something you can think about. I like to see the contrast between this card and the previous card, what's beneath the surface, because sometimes they flow along the same path, but other times they're like wildly different. Like what's going on inside can be wildly different from what your mind can grasp. And I think that's interesting. I think that's what makes this type of reading very interesting and very meaty. It gives us something to think about. The past card to me is one of the most helpful cards in a Celtic Cross reading because so much of what's going on now can be attributed to what happened before. And because I think it's easy to remember what this card is because we read from left to right, at least with English or with Filipino, we read from left to right. So the left card stands for what happened before. And we can take this literally or symbolically, of course, depending on what card shows up. And I think one question I get a lot is like, okay, what does past mean? Like, was that a week before, a month before, a year before? I think it's important not to set a timeline before we see the card itself. Let the card reveal what part of the past it is representing. Because I think we have to be very flexible when we do tarot readings. We need to be able to incorporate, our intention. Let's say, oh, I'm doing this reading because I want to understand what happened to me last month, this month, and what will happen next month. Sometimes your past card can show up representing something that happened a year before, and that still influences the timeline that you're setting for yourself. So just try to be more adaptable, let the cards lead instead of giving it very strict boundaries. I feel like the Celtic Cross gets a little sticky and tricky from this point onward. First of all, the future card can be controversial because normally people would see this as, okay, this is what's going to happen next. And the way I read with tarot, the way I do my readings, the way I use the Celtic Cross for myself or for other people is that this just opens you up to different possibilities. And I feel like it's even richer and more interesting when a quote unquote undesirable card shows up. Like when you feel yourself resisting that card, the card that shows up for your future, you get to dig through that and ask yourself, okay, why am I resisting this? Why am I resisting this possible future for myself? And then that can kind of inform you also about your state of mind, where your heart is at, and what's making you so fearful of certain possibilities and certain options for the future. Because if something makes you fearful, something is wildly against your biases for yourself, then maybe you can point yourself towards a path that's a little more comfortable for you if that's what you're gunning for. In any case, I feel like the future card never actually predicts what's going to happen next. It just shows you possibilities. The reason why I said that Celtic Cross readings can get a little sticky from here on out is because this column of cards, I think, are callbacks to the original cross of the reading. The first few cards that we pulled are processed again with this next column of cards. This card is the back to you card, I think. It's very much related to the first card of the reading, the self card or the present card. To me, it's how you view yourself after having learned about your past, present, and possible future. How do you see yourself or picture yourself after you've processed what's going on subconsciously and consciously? It can be very similar to the first card that came up. It can be vastly different. And it's just another way of inspecting yourself, looking at yourself from another perspective, which I think is what we use these tarot readings for, what I use these tarot readings for. It's to get different perspectives on what's going on so that I can see the bigger picture. This card is very interesting to me because it's what you think others' impressions or perceptions of you are. So, a while earlier, we talked about what you're conscious of, what you know about what's going on with you, and how that can probably affect the facade you're giving off to others. This card is your take on what others are probably seeing of you. And I think it's very interesting because, we can project our own biases onto this card. Well, I think we can project our biases onto every card since we're reading for ourselves here. But this card in particular, it's what we think others think of us. And I think it's interesting to delve into this given that we already processed and thought about the vibe we're actually giving off. So, is it the same? Are people seeing us the way we think we're presenting ourselves? Or are people seeing us very differently from what we actually think we're showing? I think this card just conjures self awareness. And I feel that's what every tarot reading kind of leans into. It's to build awareness of the self. And when we can step out of ourselves and actually think about other people around us, then I feel like we're kind of raising the vibe and we're raising our frequency and we're embracing ourselves and who we are a lot more. And we get to the hopes and fears card. When I do readings for others, I have to make it very clear. Sometimes what we hope for is the very same thing we're fearful of. To put it in another way, what we wish for can also indicate what we don't want to happen. When we think about what our desires are, they can also reflect or anti desires, what we don't want to happen. So depending on what shows up in this card and whatever feeling it causes us to have, that's where you can read your hopes and fears. So for example, a card that's typically undesirable, for example, shows up. Let's say it's the Five of Swords, which can bring up regret and conflict and not being able to understand a situation. That can be a fear. And the hope on the other side of that, the hope on the other side of the coin is for an understanding of what's going on, for us to not have any regrets. So it has to be like a duality between the card that shows up. And of course, if you want to be very specific, maybe you can branch this card off into two. Instead of pulling just one card for hopes and fears, you can pull one card for hope and one card for fears. But I feel that just kind of complicates the situation, and I would rather just stick to one card. And finally, another tricky card is the outcome card, because I feel like, okay, why are we getting an outcome card if we already have a future card? I think the future indicates possibility. The outcome indicates another possibility given all that we've learned. So really, this column of cards to the right of the cross is just a reprocessing of what went on in the main cross of your Celtic Cross reading. Outcomes can indicate something a little broader, not very specific, in line with whatever our question was or our intention was. This can show us the bigger picture, and I think that is essential because we have to really see the arc of our narrative here, and this kind of rounds things up. If you pulled an oracle card for the end of your reading, you can also pair that with this outcome card and just see what comes up. And this is the reading that I pulled, showing the sample cards that I didn't get to show flipped. You can see how, it really takes up a lot of space, and it can take a lot of time to process this, go card by card, and then look at things as a whole along with the oracles. Thank you for watching me go over the Celtic Cross. I hope that you picked up a thing or two. Maybe what you can do is just read for yourself with this video playing along, and take pauses to journal about your pulls. And then I think eventually you're gonna find your own spin on the Celtic Cross and maybe veer away from how I do it, veer away from the way the traditional guidebooks outline it, and you'll find your own spin. Thanks for watching, and if you have any tips and tricks that you want to share, you can put them in the comments below. If you want to learn more about Practical Magic. You can follow me on Instagram at practical_magical or visit my website at practicalmagic.co. There are a lot more practical magical tips on tarot and oracle and all the woo-woo goodness over there for you. And I'll talk to you again next time. Bye.